Kia ora, welcome to Busters. This here is my new favourite soft drink. Kefir soda. Or is it Kefir? Or is it Kefir? I don't know. It's a naturally brewed soda, low in sugar and very good for you, full of probiotics and delicious. I'll show you how to make it. This is the magic right here. Now these little grains, they call them grains, they look more like crystals, kind of rubbery. Then you can't make them, so you have to buy them, and that's your starting point, is buying some of these. Now once you've got them, if they're happy in their environment and everything's nicely balanced, they will grow and you'll end up with more, which you could maybe pass on or sell to others. So these babies go in the mix. Now I haven't rinsed this and I certainly haven't washed it. I don't want any sort of antibacterial soap or anything to come into contact with it, so if it gets a bit of build up in it, I'll probably rinse it to stop it maybe fermenting too quick, but in the condition it seems to stay in, it stays nice and clean anyway. Now I'm just going to add some sugar. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of sugar for each cup of water. Now I'll use, in this case, 1 tablespoon of raw sugar and a couple tablespoons of white sugar. The raw sugar has more nutrients in it because of the molasses content, but the white sugar is very powerful. Now that seems like a lot of sugar, but these grains are going to pretty much consume all of that sugar and turn it into, I think, lactic acid, a little wee bit of alcohol, carbon dioxide, and loads of good bacteria. Just need some water now. 3 cups of water. Give it a stir to dissolve the sugar. Now once the sugar is mostly dissolved, this is ready for me to put the grains back in, but I'm going to slip in a couple of extra treats for them. Now my water is rainwater from the water tank, so it has no chlorine or other chemicals in it. Now on the one hand that's good. Chlorine is not a good friend of the SCOBY or the grains. So if you've got chlorinated water, you probably want to let it sit uncovered for maybe 24 hours to let the chlorine evaporate off. Depending on the type of chlorine in your water, that still may not work. Ultimately, mineral water would be the best. The higher the mineral content, probably the better this stuff is going to be. Now, to increase the mineral content in this, I'm going to use a couple of little tricks. So, a little bit of eggshell will add some calcium to the water and increase its hardness slightly. So I'll drop that in. Now, a good source of nutrients is dried fruit. I'm using raisins, which have no preservatives, no additives, they're just dried grapes. So in there to go. Now you could use any dried fruit. Dried apricot might be great, but you want to be careful that it's not sulfated or it hasn't got any sulfites in it, which will of course fight the good bacteria. Lastly, I'm going to add a slice of lemon. That'll increase the acidity a little bit and get hopefully the right pH balance for my grains. Now I've given this a good scrub in fresh water just to make sure there's no stray yeasts on it, and in it goes. So now I'm ready to chuck the grains in. Hopefully I've got the right mix of nutrients and minerals and a good pH balance. So these babies go in the mix. Now I've got maybe nearly half a cup of them in my 3 cups of water. So in here I have right at the bottom a little bit of eggshell, a small handful of raisins, a piece of lemon, 3 cups of water, 3 tablespoons of sugar, and my grains. My Tibicos grains. Now that just needs to be covered so that it can breathe, but nothing can get in there, and that can sit in a nice warm cupboard for about 24 hours to do its thing. So for my second ferment I'm going to put them into these bottles. The 3 cups of my Tibicos, I now have split that across 3 330ml bottles, and I'm just going to top them up with fruit juice. Today I'm using grape juice, which actually gives a really delicious flavour. Put on the tops, and they can go in for the second ferment. Now that just means they kept at room temperature. I've just got them in the same cupboard as the main brew, fermenting away nicely. Now about every 12 hours or so I will open the caps on these, let out any pressure that's built up. It'll allow me to gauge how fizzy it's got, and when it reaches the level that I want, then it'll be ready to go. You could drink it right now, it'll be flat, and it'll be quite sugary because of the sugar in the juice. This second ferment, the bacteria that's now in this bottle will consume the sugar, or start to consume the sugar, and it will turn that into fizz and alcohol basically. Now a very, very small amount of alcohol, just like kombucha, maybe less than 0.5% or something, probably even less than that. Perhaps if you left it long enough, maybe added some extra sugar, possibly some yeast or something, you might get something that's kind of alcoholic. Might be worth a try that. But for me, as soon as it gets a nice fizz to it, then it's gone. So these ones have been 24 hours in the second ferment. What I do is I burp them every 12 hours. Just to let a little bit of fizz out, so they don't over pressurize. And when you do it, you can see them bubble a bit. And they can go back in the cupboard. Now the grains do their thing pretty quickly. In summer, probably 24 hours and they are done. And you can kind of tell, it's stopped now because I've been moving it around, but you can see the carbon dioxide bubbles coming out of the grains, and all of these raisins are floating on the top. You can smell the fermented smell. And you can taste no longer sweet, not quite sour, but you can kind of taste it that the sugar's pretty much gone. and it has a slightly yeasty fermented taste. Now, as it stands right now, this is ready to go. So you could drink this straight like this, and it's loaded with probiotics. But for a nicer and fizzier soda drink, I'll put it through a second ferment with fruit juice. And these are delicious. So I'm simply going to strain it through this strainer here. Now, this is a nylon strainer. It doesn't really like metal, so whilst it could probably cope with a little bit of contact with a stainless steel strainer, it's going to be happier if it never comes into contact with any metal. That was why I was using a plastic spoon. I'm using a glass jar and a plastic jug and a nylon strainer. And that is that. Really simple, really quite quick. So the first ferment takes maybe 24 hours in summer. It might take longer, it might take 48 hours or more in winter. Then I will add the juice and let it ferment a second time in the bottles, capped so that it does build up pressure. And I'll release that pressure every 12 hours, and that seems to be taking at the moment maybe 48 hours. I can let it go to 60, maybe 72 hours. After 3 days it's pretty fizzy. I really like it like that. Hope doesn't so much, so if I'm making some for her I might pop it in the fridge after maybe a day, day and a half. Once you put it in the fridge, the process slows down. It doesn't completely stop, so it will continue to generate a certain amount of fizz and continue to ferment, just much slower. So you wouldn't want to leave it forever. If you left it out at room temperature, I guess it'll explode. Certainly had that happen with ginger beer and other similar fermented drinks. Both the first and the second ferment will probably take quite a lot longer in winter, maybe twice as long, which means that it could take 5 days or so to get that level of fizz in the second ferment once the temperatures drop a bit. But I've only been doing it for a couple of months now, and it's been warm weather so far. It tastes great, so I'm just buying a litre of juice, and I've been trying all these different juices so far, and a litre of juice makes maybe about 9 bottles, which is 3 batches, which is, you know, basically 3 days. So if I've got, so I usually have 1 batch brewing on the first ferment and 2 or 3 batches in the second ferment, depending on how long I'm leaving them before I put them in the fridge, which is really quite a bit. Haven't ended up with a stockpile of it. I could probably slow it down by making 2 bottles with 2 cups of water. Just have to see how that goes. As at the moment it's still kind of quite trendy, so it's getting drunk. There's loads of info on the internet and probably other YouTube channels on the finer details of how to do it. So I've just showed you the method I'm using, and you know, feel free to adjust it to suit you, to suit your water, to suit your tastes. But it's pretty good and it's pretty tasty and very, very good for you. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, press all the buttons, you know, the like and subscribe and all those buttons, and hopefully that means we'll see you again soon. Take care. Mā te wā.